this evening is an Expo happy hour called Adventures in Soil Building. And we're very excited to have Steve Charter joining us. So Steve is a third generation cattle rancher in South Central Montana. He started working with innovative grazing practices in the early 1980s after being introduced to holistic resource management. Steve says, I made some good progress in restoring the range, but still having many challenges in the semi-arid environment. For the past 6 years, I've been trying new regenerative practices to restore soil biology. One of our main ways of doing this is creating vermicast in our beds and applying that to the soil in various ways. Still in the learning stage in all of this, but we'll be glad to talk about what we've been trying. So with that introduction, very excited to have Steve join us for this happy hour. So Steve, I will turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. And I guess I'd really like to, this was kind of billed as very informal. And so that's what it's going to be. And it might be a little rambling, but we'll hopefully we'll get to the points. And then the other thing I might just throw out there, it seems like, with the number of people, if people did want to kind of join in the discussion as we go, I think, that would work for me. And I'm just looking out there and seeing these names of people I've known or heard of for years. And if it kind of could be into a discussion, that would be great. And so I guess what I'd maybe start out with that's right along those lines is, I know the overall theme for AERO's meeting this year has to do with community. And I think that really ties into what I, when I was asked to speak to AERO, of course, it just brings me back to the origins of AERO and how it got started. And I know there's several people here tonight that know a lot about that. So, and it really ties into this whole idea of community and people working together. So way back in the early 70s, Northern Plains was formed by ranchers who were dealing with coal issues. And it was, we always like to think of all these rugged individuals, but mostly what gets done with groups. And I think people have a natural instinct to come together and work together. And so that's how Northern Plains got started. But then soon after that, it became really apparent that just fighting coal wasn't enough, that we had to come up with other ideas of how we could produce energy. And so basically, the people in Northern Plains who were really interested in that, it was still very closely tied to Northern Plains, but they figured that the best way would be to have a new organization that was just working on alternative energy. And my mother and John Brown, Wilbur, Elizabeth, and Jim, were you on the very first of the organizing, or you came in a little later? Probably a little later. So anyway, that's how AERO got started, and that's how Northern Plains got started, because it was just a need for people to get together and to accomplish things as a group. And I just think the character of Montana would be totally different if it wasn't for Northern Plains and AERO and the work that's been done all these years. And so, and kind of following that, when we first went to the Savory schools and came back, the first thing that we thought is, well, we need to get other people interested in these ideas. And so we kind of spread the word, and other people went to these schools. But then when you come home and have all these new ideas, it's pretty intimidating of how you can implement that and also kind of go against the grain of what's conventional. And so we formed what we called it was a management club. And jokingly, we called it the Ranching Made Difficult, ranching management club. And, you know, it went on for quite a few years, and, you know, it was a huge help. And then since then, well, you know, a lot of the work AERO has done has been just in those kind of situations of getting people together to kind of talk about these new innovative ideas. And then Northern Plains has the Soil Task Force, and you know, I know both AERO and Northern Plains really work hard to make these kind of connections possible. So anyway, that's my pitch for community, because without community, we just would be hard to get any of this done. So I guess, you know, I basically spent the last 40 years trying to figure out how to ranch in semi-arid country, and I haven't figured it out yet. And I probably never will, kind of for sure. And I guess I started out where I just wanted to know everything, you know, and when something would come up, you know, I'd just say, I just want to figure out and get to know how would I know that, or how would I know what's the right way to do that. And I guess over all these years, I've come to the conclusion that I probably never will fully kind of have the knowledge that I would like to have. And so I guess everything that I thought I knew, you know, 20 years ago, I know is not quite right. And from that perspective, I can see where I thought I knew, but I really didn't. And I kind of suspect that everything I know now, 20 years from now, if I live that long, I'll probably think, well, that's not quite right either. So I guess what I've gotten comfortable with is going ahead and doing stuff and realizing that I really don't know what the actual truth is. And in some ways, that really frees me up, because once you think you know something, you're not really open to learning, because if you know something, you don't need to learn. So just being in that kind of state of not knowing it's kind of upsetting, but I think it's a worthwhile kind of place to cultivate. Let's see. I guess just kind of going back to, you know, what we have been doing the last 40 years. So I always use the example of just the area right in front of my house here, is that, you know, at one time it was, you know, before the Europeans came, it was, you know, we don't really know what it was like. And I think it was way better than what we even could imagine. But it was a grassland that was, I think, very productive. And it was, you know, it was torn by the buffalo and all the other game. But I think one mistake we think is that was just happened. All that stuff just happened out of, without any of man's input. And I think what was here before, the indigenous people were actively managing the land. And because, you know, they were here a long time and they were totally kind of dependent on the health of that land and the health of the animals, that they developed a really extensive knowledge of how those systems work and how they could be part of it and not destroy it. And then when the Europeans came, they had no appreciation of what was there or what the native people were doing, and basically just destroyed that whole system. And then kind of the next stage after that is that they just turned, massive amounts of cattle in there in the 1880s and really overgrazed it. And then that system basically failed. And then the next kind of thing that happened was it was homesteaded. And it was a noble idea to get people out from the cities and put them in the country. But again, it was with no understanding or appreciation of what the land was. And so it was plowed up, planted to wheat, maybe a few crops were got off, and then drought hit, and basically all the soil blew away. And you can go around on our place and see old fence lines where there's big mounds of soil where that blew. And so I guess the theme is building soil. So it was basically building soil starting from scratch. And so when we took over the ranch in about 1980, in front of the house, it was probably 70% bare soil, sagebrush, cactus, a few probably native plants, but mostly, and it was kind of to their credit, but not, is it was the government planted it back to crested wheat to try to keep it from blowing away. And so there was crested wheat, but the crested wheat that was there were these really moribund, munchy plants with all this old dead matter in it that was nothing really grazed. And so it was, what crested wheat was there was really unhealthy and not very usable. And when we went to the SCS and asked them what to do, they said, well, plow it up and plant it back into crested wheat. And, that didn't strike me as a very good idea. And it was good we didn't, because that was the beginning of the drought in the 80s, and it would all just blew away again. But again, to their credit is the government agencies were putting on a school with Alan Savory, and they invited 2 ranchers, and I was one of them. And so that's when I was first exposed to ideas of holistic resource management, and it really struck a chord that I thought, well, yeah, maybe there's a better way we could do this. And I guess a lot of those early ideas in specifics probably weren't right, and we made tons of mistakes. Just the grazing periods and how severely you can graze and all those things. It was in the very beginning, and as usual, we did a lot of things wrong. But over time, we kind of adjusted things, and we've seen, really tremendous improvement from what it is today. But it's still it still wasn't what I would like. It's still not what I think it should be. And so that's when we first started thinking about other ideas of restoring this. When we started thinking about the biology and the underground, what was going on underground, because before we were just focused on the grass, but with kind of these new understanding of soil biology and the microbes and what's going on there, we started doing other things, and that's kind of where we got into vermicast and a lot of these other things. And it's all very promising, and we're seeing good results, but none of it is easy, and none of it can just be like, well, this is what really works, or this is the silver bullet. So it's, I guess, and and then is it really economical? And so like, you know, in semi-arid rangeland, well, if you double your production, you'd think that's pretty great. But even when you double your production, it's still not, you know, it's still not a lot. And almost everything that we do on this semi-arid rangeland would cost as much as if you were doing it in high rainfall or irrigated. And so it's really, anything you do is pretty questionable on a short-term payback. And you know, sometimes that's what you need. So we're still kind of looking for other ways to do this. And a couple of the things I think are promising. So we use a lot of high tensile fence, and then also some temporary poly wire fence. But that's also very labor intense, and you know, it's not cheap. And so there's two things on the horizon that might help that. One is the virtual fencing with collars and electronics, and that's in the pretty early stages. There are people doing it. They're still working out the bugs, but I think it has a lot of promise. And the other thing is a kind of a new idea called instinctive migratory grazing, I think they call it. And it's kind of a way to herd cattle to kind of reboot their instinct to act like a herd. And we've done a little bit of working with that. But you know, there are people, so there's a family down in Wyoming that's really been quite successful at it. So, and that kind of appeals to me more than the virtual fence, because it's, rather than technology, it's kind of skill-based and animal knowledge-based. And then the other thing that we're kind of experimenting a little bit with and thinking about is a way to basically feed rather than putting it out with tractors and diesel or sprays, is to let the cattle give the biology to the cows and let them spread it. And I think there's quite a bit of potential with that too, but it's all very kind of in the early stages. And you know, almost any question, I guess, that you ask, you know, like you could ask 20 different regenerative experts the same question, you'd probably get 20 different answers. And in a way, that's good, because there probably are 20 different answers. But I guess, you know, is a lot of these ideas are new and then unproven, but that doesn't mean they're not good ideas. But it's just, if you know, if you want to, you know, we like formulas and recipes and definite answers. And I think a lot of this stuff in regenerative agriculture, that we're just not there yet. I guess the other thing I'd like to talk to a little bit about is, you know, we always hear about the kind of regenerative superstars like Gabe Brown and I'm trying to think of the other guy's name, Joel Salatin, and you know, they are absolutely amazing people and do amazing things, but it kind of, a lot of times I feel like the message is as well, if they can do it, you can do it. And you know, we're not all that you know, they've been great at marketing, and they've been great at growing stuff, and they're articulate. And so I guess you tend to think, well, if you don't come up to their standards, you kind of feel a little guilty or whatever. And so I think as kind of just normal producers, we don't want to have such a high standard that we think, well, when things don't work out quite well, or when things are difficult, that we need to feel kind of bad about it. So I guess that's just a thought I had on, in promoting regenerative agriculture. Just see, it almost seems like, well, if you're not some total roaring success, you're something wrong. And I just don't think that that's true. I think we just have to be kind of easy on ourselves, that these kind of things aren't easy, and we're going to see a lot of failures. And I guess that's the other thing is, it's pretty common is that, well, we learn by our mistakes, and if you're not failing, you're not trying enough stuff. But that doesn't minimize how tough failing is. When you fail, it's economically difficult, and it's also psychologically difficult. So I just think we have to kind of back again is we have to be kind of a little easier on ourselves. Let's see, I know some other kind of words we use, and words are important, and it kind of went from the word sustainable to now we're talking regenerative, and well, what's the difference between that? And kind of the thought is like, we can't sustain something that's not good is if it's what we have, and so instead of sustaining it, we need to regenerate it. And I think that's an important distinction. And so the other kind of word that's we often use is being a steward of the land and stewardship. And on the surface, that sounds really good. It's like, well, what's better than steward of land? And I always kind of aspired to that. And if somebody called me a good steward, I thought that was a compliment. And then as my thinking kind of evolves, stewardship, I think, implies that you're the boss and you know best. And we're going to take our great human knowledge and apply that to the land. And that's what the land needs, is our stewardship. And in reality, nature and the land have been producing plants and animals and foods for billions of years, and it knows its business really well. And we are just on the very verge of kind of a minimal understanding of what's going on. So if we come into this situation and say, well, I'm the steward and I know best, that's probably not going to work very well. So I think when we approach anything that we're doing, that instead of being a steward, I don't know what would be a better word, maybe we're more like students or apprentices to the land. And if we kind of take that approach, I think we're more likely to try to come up with answers that work. Let's see. So anyway, I know I haven't talked about a lot of the particulars of soil building. Um, and it's, I think it's possible on semi-arid land, but it's difficult. And of course, our biggest tool is our animals. And if we can use them, but then say also the idea of restoring the microbes. And so, that's the idea with the vermicast is, we're not putting out a whole lot, just trying to get them out there and then hoping the conditions will be right. They can thrive. So I guess maybe if we could just go ahead and open it up for questions and maybe try to get a little more of a discussion. And I know I've just touched on a lot of different kind of things and not very much in depth. And so I know, John, you've been very involved in this operation here and know a lot about it. And would appreciate any kind of thoughts you've had over the years too. Anybody else? Not necessarily questions, but if anybody's got thoughts kind of on these subjects, I'd really appreciate that too. Yeah, Mark.
I guess the first thing is, I really take to heart your thoughts about kind of being easy on ourselves. I would say that a lot of precipitation covers a lot of sins, and it's hard in Montana to ranch and to grow, and when we're comparing ourselves to people that have 20 or 30 or more inches of rain a year, that's a whole different environment. I am curious about what kind of measurement and data collection you do. I mean, are you kind of quantifying what difference you're making?
Yeah, and that's something we've really wanted to do from the beginning, and so we've done quite a bit of like transect monitoring, and then we also did quite a few kind of baseline soil testing, and then different people, different kind of groups and organizations come in and do it, but there really hasn't been the consistency that we need. And that's kind of whenever there's a deal of like, well, what you need from, organizations or government. And it's always, we need somebody to help us collect the data, because, it's hard enough just doing all this stuff, and then to be able to really do a good job of monitoring it and collecting that data it's kind of beyond, I think, what most producers can do. So, there needs to be an organized effort to, and there's been a few kind of starts at it, but it really hasn't been consistent. We've had several people kind of start, and John's kind of familiar with.
Yeah, this is the monitoring is always a big a big issue, and I was just thinking as you were talking, and the kind of monitoring that's fun to do, and that you have and we have done a lot of, is what I'm referring to as wow monitoring. And what that means is, the first time we saw dung beetles after Steve quitting using porons on the cows, and it was like, that was a wow moment. That was that's a big thing to take into account. It's not something that you can really put into a spreadsheet necessarily, but it really is significant. And then, a few years after that, walking out in front of the house, chest high grass and all kinds of things chest high. That was another wow moment, kind of getting a hint of what it might have been like before all of the practices that took us away from what it was and what it could be. So, there are lots of those there, and we had some wow moments with bricks refractometer and getting sugar content and seeing the difference in that, and as you were talking, Steve, about soil building, I think that it just got me thinking more about what is that and we think that that's the goal, is to build soil, but I think that what will build soil is building relationship with it. That really started, and I know you've been doing that for your life, and it was like watching that process accelerate and deepen as started looking at, well, what's underneath the surface and building relationship with that. And so another wow moment of when kids come out and look at the worm operation and just love being on their hands and knees and holding the worms and just loving them. So those are some of the things that struck me strike me as we're here talking about this, and what has happened and what can happen. And the livestock management that you're adopting now, Steve, is just a really, really deepening of your relationship with those cows on a pretty intimate level, and what's gonna emerge from that, who knows? And how do you measure it? We don't even know what that is gonna, what we're looking for. What are we looking for in that kind of thing? Anyway, that's kind of some of my thoughts. I have had just an extreme pleasure of being out there and working alongside Steve for a lot of time.
There's the wow moments, and then there's like this summer the kind of moments when the grasshoppers and 110 degrees. We had 110 degrees in June, and we had 3 or 4 other days where it was over 110, and and very, very little rain. But even through those things, you can see subtle things going on, and it's easy just to think, oh, it's just all awful. But when we did get we got one pretty good rain in August, and I thought, well, that grass is totally dormant. It's not going to come back at all. And it really, there was really some resilience there. So even in these awful years, we are seeing stuff, but it's definitely never just steady upward progress. It's like, you make great advances and then you kind of slide back. I know on monitoring, the one thing I think that might be one of the most doable things is measuring, you might have to help me out on the words here, the moisture penetration.
Oh, the penetrometer? Yeah.
Well, not the penetrometer.
Oh, infiltration.
And what's that called?
Infiltration?
The infiltration rates. And so that's something, you got to do it consistently so that, you're measuring the same place. But basically it's, you'll take a ring, pound it in, pour water on it, and then time how long that water needs to go in. And that's it's a measurement of, if you don't have any organic matter and your soil is compacted, it's just going to sit there. And that's what it does in a lot of this area. And, but that is, it's going to, if you're getting improvement there, it's going to tell you you're getting improvement, over the whole spectrum. And it's, it's kind of a low tech way to, and we've done some of that. And this back to again is like, we need that consistency. And also I think it just means a lot more if it was a third party measuring it. So back to your question, Mark, is we need more data. We need more, ways to monitor this stuff. But I think we need help in doing it.
Yeah, we got a couple of questions here. And David, I want to talk about yours, and just to get it started, Steve, you jump in. I know, but we're talking about vermicast production and application and what impacts we've observed and measured, and one of the things that our system is so good at is paying attention to annual changes, and some of the things, the changes happen over a longer period of time than year to year. And so in the worm production, it's been a attempt to put added value, if you will, to some of the byproducts of the operation, the manure and wood chips from town, and some of the other things that we attempt to accumulate on the ranch, and leaves from town and stuff like that, and running them through worms to add value to them. And with the value, it's hard to know how that's going to show up. Sometimes it shows up as selling vermicast to other people. Sometimes it shows up in having something to put out on a landscape that, we did a lot of well, sounds like a good idea. Let's try it. And so we did a lot, and Steve still is doing it. A lot of extract, really dilute, almost homeopathic concentration of worm castings, extract, and some other biological stimulants. And what has been noticed, this is one of those wows, is spring green up happens earlier than neighbors. It's really noticeable, even without deeply looking at it. You can see it and and then the speed at which it grows. And like Steve was saying, thought that everything was going to be had gone into dormancy, and got a little bit of rain and things started greening up. So those are a few of the things, and some of the diversities things are filling in, like you was saying. It isn't 70% bare ground now. It might be 20%, and that's a big change. And the varieties are changing and stuff. So
so yeah, I'll jump in there on the vermicast. So we do a lot of different things, so it's always hard to just say, well, this is what did this. And but I definitely think it's helped. But I do know, and we sell some, and most people we sell it to are probably using it, in irrigated or maybe a little better country. And so one way people have been using it the last couple of years is with putting it in a no-till drill, and when they seed their cover crops in, just putting the vermicast right with it. And so, those seeds are right in contact with that when they first start to wake up. And somebody explained it, how that works is like the seeds kind of like when they start to wake up, they sense, well, what's the conditions here? And if they first thing they sense is vermicast in that biology, they're going to think, man, conditions are great here. It's time to get going and really put out. And I think the other really economical way I think that vermicast could be used is to inoculate seeds. And so it's that same thing is, if those seeds are coded in biology, and when they get ready to sprout, they've got the message that, yeah, that things are good. So I think that's another really probably economic way to do it.
Robin was asking a little bit about biochar and some of those experiments, if you're willing to talk about that.
Right, and we're just very early into thinking about biochar and using biochar, but I've just started incorporating it in the worm feed, and so I think that's a way to kind of really leverage the effects of biochar. In Europe and Australia, biochar is used a lot as a cattle feed additive, and it's not approved here yet. But the idea with, they have these really interesting studies where the performance and health of the livestock improved dramatically when cattle receive biochar. But then the other good thing about that is that biochar passes through and then gets incorporated. And there's a guy in Australia that's higher rainfall, and he grazes his, I think, almond orchards. And he's really built his soil up, and he's got kind of this healthy dung beetle population where, the manure will come out and it'll get covered in dung beetles, and those dung beetles will take that down in the soil. So I think the potential for biochar is really really good, but we're just kind of beginning to use that and understand it, I guess.
Steve, I wanted to ask you, maybe more nuts and bolts on the ground,
Sure.
Given this was probably undoubtedly the worst growing year for cattlemen in our lifetimes.
Mm-hmm.
And even though you did get two inches of rain or whatever, that did bring back some of the grass in August, were you forced to reduce some of your herd? How did you manage differently to try to accommodate for the problems that you were encountering with the trifecta of heat,
right, and
grasshoppers?
So we kind of saw it coming in a way, and then last year was bad. So I did have my numbers down somewhat, but we're still pretty well stocked. So one thing, and we have our winter ranges down here on it's like pretty darn dry, 10 to 12 inches of rainfall. And I think this year we're probably around 6. But we have our summer ranges up in the Bull Mountains, which is more like 14 inches, maybe some 14, 15. And that doesn't seem like a lot of difference between, 10 to 12, but it's it makes really a lot of difference. So we've seen a lot more progress up there, especially in the riparian areas. So, and then even this year we had some pretty timely rains up there. There wasn't a lot, but they were just, and we didn't have too bad a grass year up there, and the cattle did really well. But the main thing is I've tried to, our ranch was kind of divided up family, years ago, and what we ended up with was pretty questionably not economically the size of an economical unit. So we always looked for ways to be able to carry more numbers. And one way we did that was there's the beet factory in Billings, and we were able to get like beet tailings really cheaply. And that's been the other really great thing, is a way to bring organic matter in. So that's been kind of one of our mainstays. And then all of a sudden, none of that stuff's available. And hay is just through the roof. And so that's been our main problem is, we have been bringing in outside feed, and now that's just kind of out of the question. So we're going to have to cut our numbers more here. So I think I'll probably get rid of, just keep all the very youngest cattle. And you kind of hate to do it because we're right on the verge, I think, of when this cattle market might get better because the numbers are so low. But it's pretty tough to do it buying $300-400. Not gonna work either. So, but our situation was pretty radically different for a lot of people around here, as far as, we never really ran out of grass. So that was good.
Steve, I want to acknowledge that we have a question in the chat. I don't think that's been answered yet, but from Caitlin, and she says, I'm a complete worm nerd and love to hear all this. This is returning back to the vermicast conversation, but she would like to know what your system looks like if you hadn't already mentioned that, or in case she had missed that.
Yeah, no, I should for sure. So ours is pretty crude in a way. You hear of all these systems with continuous feed and indoors, and ours is, we started, when we first started, we just laid straw out on the ground, and then put our worm feed in there, and then worms in there. And it's kind of evolved towards now, instead of just on top of the ground, they're kind of pits, these long trenches that are maybe a couple inches or a couple feet deep. And, you in all the worm books you read is do not put them in trenches because they're all going to drown. But, we never get enough rain to make that a problem. So, so then we just basically feed on top, and then the harvest of a vermicast is kind of on the bottom. And so usually when we harvest a pit, I'll scrape off the top, maybe foot where the undigested feed and the worms are. And I'll put that, and then the stuff lower down is the harvest vermicast. And the other thing we kind of experimented this year was one of the worm beds, we quit feeding it and then would put a bucket with holes in it and then put really kind of rich feed into there to get the worms to come out. This is the first year we kind of had a crash in numbers, and I talked to other people and they, you know, they had similar experiences, and I'm not really sure why. You know, we did have it like in March, we had like a, you know, 40 below or whatever. And so in the winter, we'll do a final feed, then I'll put leaves or straw on, and then our tarp. And then on top of that, we get a lot of, John's been helping me load bags of leaves from a lawn service in town. And so a lot of times we'll get enough bags where we can just put the bags right on top and really insulate them. But they're amazingly tough, way more than what anybody thinks they are. Because there was one year when we had a bunch of stuff that we were harvesting and had out on the ground, and then didn't get it harvested, and it just sat there and froze solid all winter, and spring warmed up and it was still full of worms. So they're pretty hardy, and I think maybe they're probably becoming more adapt. You know, we've had it probably, I don't know, it's probably been 6 years or so, and I think they're becoming more adapted. And then we just try to feed as much diversity as we can of feed, and so it's hay and straw and manure and leaves, and at times we didn't really have time, but for a while we were gathering coffee and the beet tailings and just cardboard and wood chips. We like to do like lots of wood chips and straw and things like that, because you know what it takes to break that down is fungi, and so if you put that kind of stuff in there, it'll increase the fungi in the vermicast, and that's what we're really lacking in most of our soils is the fungi. So, yeah, the worms are fun.
Thank you. Caitlin, anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, thank you so much for answering that. What type of worms do you have, or do you know what species?
They're red wigglers for the most part. Oh, and I'll tell John is we did try some, what do they call European, what?
Yeah, European night crawlers.
And we had one bed of those, and then the red wigglers kind of moved into their bed and kind of took over, and then we didn't see too many of them. And then here this year, John, they're kind of, some of those European night crawlers are showing up in the other beds now. So I hadn't seen them, but they were big and healthy, and but red wigglers I think are probably for Montana.
Awesome, thank you.
And there was another question up here that had to do with ever working with indigenous communities on soil building and land management.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really have a lot of direct result. We did, you know, John and I years ago went down to the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, and there was a plot of ground that they had, and so we talked with some ideas with them about that, but just kind of, but I do think we need to seek that knowledge out, because you know how much of it's left I don't know, but I'm sure there is some, and then it's also, I guess, rather than maybe particular practices, it's a little bit attitude, I guess. And I do think there's a spiritual connection with all this stuff we do. And the more we kind of can understand that and give it credit, I think the more likely we are to be successful. And that's probably what's most uncomfortable for us, is because you know we're taught science and we believe in science, you know, and I believe in science, but I think I think there's other aspects here that we need to kind of be in touch with doing this stuff. And I think, that's where these indigenous cultures, that was just part of it. And I think that because they had that kind of connection, I think they had a better understanding than we do a lot of the
time. Awesome, thank you. We have one question from Mark in the chat. Mark, I'm gonna throw it over to you. Maybe your final question for the night. I don't want to stifle any discussion, but acknowledge we're at 6:30 and I've seen some people jump off. But Mark, do you want to go ahead and ask or unmute?
Yeah, I was just curious, Steve, if you've been able to monetize the soil carbon sequestration that you've been doing, or have you considered that?
On a way to get paid for it, like on, we've right from the beginning, we just checked out almost everything, and it was always not very satisfactory. So far, I think it's, and I'm pretty suspicious of anything hedge fund Wall Street thing of where they're going to monetize this stuff. And if that does happen, I don't think it should be, these outside companies doing it for profit. I think it should be producers co-op or something like that, because there's just not a good track record of trying to make it into kind of like some kind of a Wall Street scheme. And I understand the necessity of it, but so far I'm unimpressed with, and that's not to say there aren't some good ones out there. But, that's kind of been my experience anyway.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I do want to put the call out for a final question, if anyone has one. Giving it a few seconds. But with that, then we will close our happy hour. And I just want to say, first of all, a big thank you, as always, to Steve for sharing your wisdom and insights and experiences, to John as well for sharing, and to everyone for joining us this evening and for your wonderful questions as well. I know I saw Heather post in the chat. This was very inspiring, and thank you all for sharing.